What if I told you that every breath you take contains atoms that once drifted through the vacuum of space? What if the ground beneath your feet right now has been ocean floor? Volcanic wasteland, tropical paradise, and frozen tundra, all before your species took its first step?
Look at your hand. The calcium in your bones was forged in the heart of an exploding star. The iron in your blood was created in a supernova that detonated before our sun even existed. The carbon in every cell of your body traveled billions of miles through interstellar space before gravity pulled it into the swirling disk of dust and gas that would become Earth. You are, quite literally, made of stardust. But here's what makes your existence truly extraordinary. For 4.54 billion years, this planet evolved, transformed, and prepared itself through catastrophe and calm, through extinctions and explosions of life, through ice ages and infernos, all leading to this moment where you can sit comfortably, listen to these words, and comprehend the incomprehensible journey that created you. Before we descend into deep time together, if you've ever looked at the stars and felt both impossibly small and impossibly significant, consider subscribing to this channel. And if you're listening to this at night, wherever you are in the world, drop a comment below. Tell me your location and what time it is. I want to picture this story stretching across time zones and continents, connecting us all to the same ancient past. Because that's what this journey is. A connection to every living thing that ever existed, to the very planet itself, and to the cosmic forces that shaped our solar system. This isn't just Earth's story, it's your origin story, written in stone and bone and genetic code across 4.54 billion years. Let's begin where everything began, not with life, but with violence. Imagine a region of space so ordinary that nothing remarkable should ever happen there. No dramatic cosmic events, no extraordinary features. Just one arm of a spiral galaxy spinning slowly through the darkness, indistinguishable from billions of other regions scattered across the universe. But 4.6 billion years ago, something disturbed this mundane corner of the Milky Way. A shockwave rippled through space, perhaps from a nearby supernova, perhaps from the collision of neutron stars. This shockwave struck a massive cloud of gas and dust, remnants from earlier generations of stars that had lived, died, and scattered their atoms across the void. The cloud, composed primarily of hydrogen and helium with traces of heavier elements, began to collapse. Gravity, that most patient of forces, pulled the material inward. As it compressed, it heated. The cloud fragmented into smaller clumps, each destined to become a star or fade away into nothingness. At the center of such a fragment, pressure and temperature climbed to unimaginable extremes. Atoms crushed together with such force that their nuclei fused, releasing tremendous energy. This is the moment our sun ignited, not in peaceful serenity, but through violent collapse and nuclear ignition, joining perhaps hundreds of sibling stars born in the same molecular cloud nursery. Most of those stellar siblings have since drifted away, scattered across the galaxy over billions of years. We may never know their locations, but in that ancient moment, our sun blazed to life, and around it, the leftover material from the collapsing cloud formed a disk, a swirling accretion of dust, rock, ice, and gas. Within this protoplanetary disk, the laws of physics began their patient work. Dust particles collided at low speeds and stuck together through electrostatic forces. These clumps attracted more material through gravity. Millimeter-sized pebbles became centimeter-sized pebbles. Pebbles became meter-sized rocks. Rocks became kilometer-sized planetesimals. The early solar system was a cosmic shooting gallery. Planetesimals crashed into each other with devastating force, sometimes shattering into fragments, sometimes merging into larger bodies. No stability existed, no calm, just endless collision and accretion, destruction and creation over millions of years. In the inner solar system, where temperatures from the young sun were too high for ice to survive, rocky planets formed. Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, worlds worlds built from silicates, metals, and minerals that could withstand intense heat. Earth accreted from countless collisions, each impact adding mass and energy. Picture this protoplanet 4.54 billion years ago. There is no solid ground in any sense you would recognize. The entire surface is an ocean of molten rock, magma glowing red and orange, radiating heat into space. Surface temperatures exceeded 1200 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead, to vaporize water instantly, to sterilize anything resembling life before it could even form. The atmosphere, if we can call it that, is a toxic envelope of hydrogen, helium, methane, ammonia, and water vapor. It's thick, choking, and superheated. The pressure at the surface is crushing. Volcanic eruptions occur continuously as the young planet's interior churns and settles. Earth spins wildly, completing a full rotation in just 5 or 6 hours. There is no moon yet, no stable day-night cycle, just a world spinning rapidly in the darkness, pelted constantly by debris left over from planetary formation. Chunks of rock the size of mountains rain down from space. Each impact releases energy equivalent to thousands of nuclear weapons, liquefying more surface material, adding to the chaos. Some of these impactors are massive enough to create temporary atmospheres of vaporized rock that take centuries to condense. Geologists call this period the Hadean Eon, named after Hades, the Greek underworld. It's an apt name for a world of fire, sulfur, and destruction. A planetary inferno that bears no resemblance to the blue marble we inhabit today. For 500 million years, Earth exists in this hellish state. The surface gradually cools as heat radiates into space, but bombardment continues. Heavier elements like iron sink toward the planet's core, while lighter materials float toward the surface. This differentiation creates Earth's layered structure, an iron-nickel core, a silicate mantle, and eventually a thin crust. But Earth is not finished with catastrophe. The most violent event in its entire history is yet to come. In the outer solar system, beyond Mars, another planetary embryo has been growing through this same chaotic accretion process. This body, later named Theia by scientists after the Greek titan who gave birth to the moon goddess Selene, is roughly the size of Mars, about half Earth's diameter. For millions of years, Theia orbits the Sun in an unstable configuration. Its trajectory intersects with Earth's orbital path. The laws of celestial mechanics are merciless. Eventually, inevitably, their paths converge. The collision occurs at approximately 4.51 billion years ago. Theia strikes Earth at an oblique angle, not head-on but grazing, hitting with a velocity of about 4 kilometers per second. The impact energy is beyond human comprehension, equivalent to several billion nuclear bombs detonating simultaneously. Theia disintegrates instantly. Its iron core merges with Earth's. Its mantle vaporizes into superheated plasma. The impact liquefies a significant portion of Earth's surface, creating an ocean of molten rock thousands of kilometers across. Debris, vaporized rock, molten droplets, shattered chunks of planetary crust erupts into space. Some escapes Earth's gravity entirely, lost forever to the void. But most material enters orbit, forming a ring around Earth, like Saturn's, except composed of liquid stone instead of ice particles. The temperature in near-Earth space spikes to thousands of degrees. For weeks or months, the night sky glows red with orbiting magma. Slowly, as the debris cools, it begins to coalesce. Larger chunks attract smaller ones through gravity. The ring contracts, condenses, and forms a sphere, the Moon. This violent birth has profound consequences that will echo through the entire history of life. The impact tilts Earth's rotational axis by 23.5 degrees, creating seasons. The Moon's gravitational pull stabilizes this tilt over geological time, preventing wild oscillations that would create extreme climate variations incompatible with complex life. The Moon's gravitational interaction gradually slows Earth's rotation through tidal friction. Over hundreds of millions of years, Earth's 5-hour day will stretch to 24 hours, creating the day-night cycle that will regulate biological rhythms for every organism that ever lives. But for now, both Earth and its newly formed moon are dead worlds, glowing, cooling, completely sterile. The moon, lacking any atmosphere to retain heat, cools more quickly than Earth. Within a few million years, its surface solidifies into the cratered landscape we see today, a frozen record of bombardment that Earth, with its active geology and erosion, will eventually erase. Earth takes longer to cool. For tens of millions of years, the surface remains partially molten, but gradually, inexorably, heat radiates into the vacuum of space. The magma ocean begins to solidify from the surface downward, forming the first primitive crust. Still, Earth remains utterly hostile to life. No water, no oxygen, no organic molecules, just barren rock beneath a poisonous sky, bombarded by radiation from a young sun that burns more violently than it does today.
But change is coming. From the cold outer reaches of the solar system, water is on its way. Water should not exist on Earth. This is a problem that puzzled planetary scientists for decades. Earth formed in what astronomers call the frost line's inner edge, the region close enough to the sun that temperatures during planetary formation would have vaporized any water present. Ice could not condense in the inner solar system. Any water incorporated into the young Earth would have boiled away into space, carried off by solar wind, or lost during the violent impacts of planetary assembly. Yet today, 71% of Earth's surface is covered in liquid water. Oceans contain approximately 1.4 billion cubic kilometers of it. Where did it come from? The answer arrives from beyond Mars, from the frigid outer solar system, where temperatures are low enough for water ice to remain stable. In this cold zone, comets form by the billions. These dirty snowballs are mixtures of water ice, frozen carbon dioxide, methane, and rocky material. They orbit the Sun in vast reservoirs, the Kuiper Belt beyond Neptune, and the even more distant Oort cloud, which extends halfway to the nearest star. Gravitational interactions with the giant planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, perturb these cometary orbits. Millions of comets get flung from the outer solar system into elliptical paths that carry them sunward. Many collide with the inner planets. Between approximately 4.1 and 3.8 billion years ago, Earth experiences what scientists call the Late Heavy Bombardment. This is not the gradual tapering off of planetary formation impacts. This is a sudden spike in collision rates, possibly triggered by Jupiter and Saturn migrating to new orbital positions and destabilizing the asteroid belt and cometary reservoirs. Comets and asteroids rain down on Earth in numbers difficult to comprehend. The moon's cratered surface preserves evidence of this bombardment. Vast impact basins like Mare Imbrium and Mare Serenitatis, created by asteroids dozens of kilometers across, slamming into the lunar surface with apocalyptic force. Earth, with 8 times the surface area and much stronger gravity, receives far more impacts. Each comet that strikes delivers not just destructive kinetic energy, but precious cargo, water ice that vaporizes on impact, adding to Earth's growing atmosphere and eventually condensing on the cooling surface. Some water also arrives via carbonaceous asteroids, rocky bodies that contain water bound within their mineral structures. When these asteroids collide with Earth, the impact heat releases this water as steam. Century by century, millennium by millennium, Earth's water inventory grows. By 3.8 billion years ago, the surface temperature has dropped below 100 degrees Celsius, the boiling point of water at Earth's atmospheric pressure. This is a critical threshold. For the first time in Earth's history, water can exist as a liquid on the surface. And then it begins to rain. The rain falls for thousands of years, perhaps tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands. Scientists can only estimate, but the transition from a dry planet to one covered in ocean requires transferring billions of cubic kilometers of water from the atmosphere to the surface. The rain doesn't fall on continents because continents don't exist yet. The early crust is mostly basaltic, dark, iron-rich rock similar to modern ocean floors. The rain falls on bare volcanic plains, into impact craters, into calderas and rifts. Water pools in low-lying areas, lakes form, seas emerge. Eventually, a global ocean covers most of Earth's surface, perhaps 4 kilometers deep on average, broken only by scattered volcanic islands and the occasional meteor impact crater rim rising above the waves. Beneath this ocean, volcanic activity continues. Hydrothermal vents, underwater volcanoes, pump superheated mineral-rich water into the cold ocean. These vents create temperature gradients and chemical disequilibrium, conditions that will prove crucial for what comes next. The atmosphere is still toxic by modern standards. It contains virtually no free oxygen, just nitrogen, carbon dioxide, methane, ammonia, and water vapor. Ultraviolet radiation from the sun, unfiltered by any ozone layer, bombards the surface with mutagenic intensity. Lightning storms of unimaginable ferocity crackle across the sky. Volcanic eruptions release sulfur compounds that acidify the ocean in localized regions.
This is the world where chemistry becomes biology, where non-living matter begins its slow, improbable transformation into life. The exact location remains unknown. Perhaps it happened in shallow tidal pools, where sunlight, minerals, and organic molecules concentrated. Perhaps near hydrothermal vents, where chemical energy was abundant. Perhaps in ice-covered regions where molecules could accumulate without being destroyed by UV radiation. What we know is this: somewhere, somehow, around 3.8 to 3.5 billion years ago, organic chemistry crossed an invisible threshold. In Western Australia, in a remote region called Pilbara, ancient rocks rise from red desert sand. These formations are among the oldest exposed stone on Earth's surface, dating to approximately 3.5 billion years ago. And within them, preserved in mineral matrix for over 3 billion years, are structures called stromatolites. Stromatolites are layered mounds of sediment, formed by the growth and sediment-trapping activities of microbial communities. We know this because similar structures still form today in shallow marine environments, built by colonies of cyanobacteria, photosynthetic microorganisms that create thin mats on the seafloor. The Australian stromatolites are fossils. They are fossilized evidence that by 3.5 billion years ago, life was not just present, but thriving, already complex enough to form colonies, already sophisticated enough to alter its environment by trapping sediment and building structures visible to the naked eye. But this discovery raises an uncomfortable question. If life was already this established by 3.5 billion years ago, how much earlier did it actually begin? The oldest potential evidence comes from rocks in Greenland and Canada, dated to 3.7 to 3.8 billion years ago. These rocks contain carbon isotope ratios suggestive of biological activity, preferential incorporation of lighter carbon-12 over carbon-13, a signature of photosynthesis or metabolism. The evidence is disputed, debated, not universally accepted, but it suggests life may have emerged very quickly after Earth became habitable. This raises the deepest question in science: how did life begin? The honest answer is, we don't know for certain. We have hypotheses, experiments, and tantalizing clues, but the exact path from chemistry to biology remains one of science's greatest unsolved mysteries. What we do know is that life's chemistry can arise from non-living materials given the right conditions. In 1952, a graduate student named Stanley Miller worked with his advisor Harold Urey at the University of Chicago. They designed an experiment to simulate Earth's early atmosphere. They filled a sealed glass apparatus with methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and water vapor, gases thought to be present on the young Earth. Then they subjected this mixture to electrical sparks simulating lightning. The experiment ran for 1 week. When Miller analyzed the water that had condensed in the apparatus, he made a startling discovery. Amino acids had formed. Glycine, alanine, aspartic acid, the fundamental building blocks of proteins, had spontaneously assembled from inorganic gases and electricity alone. Life's chemistry wasn't special. It was inevitable chemistry given the right ingredients and energy sources. Subsequent experiments have produced even more complex organic molecules. Nucleobases, the building blocks of RNA and DNA, lipids, which form cell membranes, and even simple sugars. The raw materials of life arise naturally wherever carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen come together with energy. But molecules aren't alive. A pile of amino acids isn't an organism, any more than a pile of bricks is a house. Life requires organization, compartmentalization, metabolism, reproduction, and evolution. Somewhere in Earth's early ocean, perhaps near a hydrothermal vent, perhaps in a tidal pool, perhaps beneath ice, organic molecules began assembling into more complex structures. Lipids, fatty molecules with water-repelling tails and water-attracting heads, spontaneously form spherical membranes when mixed with water. These protocells created boundaries, separating an inside from an outside, concentrating molecules in one location where they could interact. RNA molecules, which can both store information and catalyze chemical reactions, may have been the first genetic material. In the RNA world hypothesis, early life was entirely based on RNA before DNA and proteins evolved. RNA could copy itself, mutate, and evolve, all requirements for life. Simple metabolic pathways emerged, allowing these protocells to harvest energy from their environment. Some used chemical gradients across membranes, others captured energy from sunlight or chemical reactions. And then, at some unknowable moment between 3.8 and 3.5 billion years ago, one of these chemical systems crossed the threshold. It became capable of reproduction with heritable variation. It became subject to natural selection. It became alive. The first organism wasn't impressive. It was certainly smaller than a bacterium, perhaps just a cluster of self-replicating RNA molecules enclosed in a lipid membrane. It had no nucleus, no specialized structures, no complexity. But it could reproduce, and when it reproduced, random errors occurred, mutations in its RNA sequences. Most mutations were neutral or harmful, but occasionally one provided an advantage: slightly more efficient metabolism, slightly better membrane integrity, slightly faster replication.
Organisms with advantages produced more offspring. Those offspring inherited the advantageous mutation. Over generations, the population evolved. This is natural selection. This is evolution, and it has been operating continuously for 3.8 billion years, shaping every organism that has ever existed, including you. For the next billion years, life remains invisible to any hypothetical observer. No plants, no animals, no fungi. Just single-celled organisms too small to see without a microscope, floating in the ocean, clinging to rocks, thriving in conditions that would be lethal to almost everything alive today. These early organisms were prokaryotes, cells without nuclei or membrane-bound internal structures. Simple in architecture, but sophisticated in chemistry. They evolved an astonishing diversity of metabolic strategies, finding ways to extract energy from nearly every available chemical gradient in their environment.
Some organisms became chemotrophs, harvesting energy from chemical reactions. They consumed hydrogen sulfide bubbling from volcanic vents, or methane seeping from the seafloor, or iron dissolved in seawater. They built their bodies from carbon dioxide and minerals, creating organic molecules from inorganic materials. Others became phototrophs, capturing energy from sunlight. The earliest photosynthetic organisms used hydrogen sulfide or hydrogen gas instead of water, releasing sulfur or nothing at all instead of oxygen. They colonized shallow waters where sunlight penetrated, forming thin mats that trapped sediment and built stromatolites, those layered structures we find fossilized in ancient rocks. These microbial mats weren't random collections of cells. They were communities, ecosystems in miniature. Different species occupied different layers based on light availability, oxygen tolerance, and nutrient requirements. The surface layer contained photosynthesizers. Beneath them lived organisms that consumed their waste products. Deeper still were anaerobic species that thrived in anaerobic darkness. Competition drove innovation. Cells that could replicate faster, survive harsher conditions, or exploit new resources outcompeted their neighbors. Horizontal gene transfer, the direct swapping of genetic material between organisms, allowed successful innovations to spread rapidly through populations. Some cells developed flagella, whip-like tails that enabled movement toward food or away from danger. Others evolved protective capsules or formed spores that could survive desiccation and extreme temperatures. Still others discovered how to live inside rocks, boring into mineral grains to escape ultraviolet radiation. By 3 billion years ago, microbial life had colonized virtually every aquatic environment on Earth. Organisms thrived in boiling volcanic springs and beneath Antarctic ice. They lived in acid mine drainage with pH levels that would dissolve metal, and in alkaline soda lakes caustic enough to burn skin. They survived in salt deposits so concentrated that water couldn't exist in liquid form, entering dormancy for millions of years until rare moisture returned. Life wasn't fragile. Life was relentless. But the most important innovation was still developing. Somewhere in the shallow oceans, a type of bacteria was evolving a new form of photosynthesis that would fundamentally transform Earth forever. Cyanobacteria don't look revolutionary. Under a microscope, they appear as simple chains or spherical clusters of cells, tinted blue-green by photosynthetic pigments. Some species form filaments, others create colonies. Most are so small that thousands could fit on a pinhead. But these unremarkable organisms developed a chemical innovation that would become one of the most consequential evolutionary events in Earth's history. Earlier photosynthetic bacteria used hydrogen sulfide or ferrous iron as electron donors, chemical sources abundant near volcanic vents, but rare in most environments. This limitation restricted where photosynthesis could occur. Cyanobacteria evolved a different approach. They learned to split water molecules, H2O, using energy from sunlight. This process, called oxygenic photosynthesis, extracts electrons from water to power the creation of organic molecules from carbon dioxide. Water is abundant everywhere in the ocean. By using water instead of rare chemicals, cyanobacteria could photosynthesize anywhere sunlight reached. This gave them an enormous competitive advantage. But there was a byproduct, a waste product released during water-splitting photosynthesis: oxygen. For Earth's existing organisms, oxygen wasn't just unnecessary, it was toxic. Oxygen is one of the most reactive elements in the periodic table. It strips electrons from organic molecules, generating destructive free radicals that damage DNA, proteins, and cell membranes. In high concentrations, oxygen is a powerful poison. For billions of years, Earth's atmosphere and oceans contained virtually no free oxygen. Life evolved in an oxygen-free world, developing metabolic pathways that couldn't tolerate oxygen's corrosive chemistry. Most organisms were obligate anaerobes, species that die in oxygen's presence. At first, the oxygen produced by cyanobacteria didn't accumulate. Earth's oceans contained vast quantities of dissolved iron, Fe2+, which reacted immediately with oxygen to form iron oxide, rust. The oxygen produced by photosynthesis was consumed by ocean chemistry faster than it could build up. For hundreds of millions of years, cyanobacteria pumped oxygen into the ocean, and the ocean turned red with iron oxide precipitate. This precipitate settled to the seafloor in layers, creating the banded iron formations that would later become humanity's primary iron ore deposits. Geologists can read Earth's oxidation history in these formations. The bands alternate between iron-rich and silica-rich layers, recording pulses of oxygen production and depletion over millions of years. They're a chemical fossil record of the struggle between life's waste product and Earth's capacity to absorb it. But chemical reactions have limits. Eventually, around 2.4 billion years ago, the ocean's dissolved iron reservoir was exhausted. There was nothing left to react with oxygen. And that's when oxygen began escaping into the atmosphere. What happened next is sometimes called the oxygen catastrophe, and the name is appropriate. As oxygen concentration in the atmosphere rose from near zero to approximately 1 to 2% of current levels, the effect on existing life was apocalyptic. This was the first mass extinction event in Earth's history, and the only one caused not by asteroids or volcanoes, but by life itself. Anaerobic bacteria, which had dominated Earth's ecosystems for over 1 billion years, died by the trillions. Species that had thrived in every aquatic environment suddenly found their habitats poisoned. Oxygen penetrated deeper into the ocean as atmospheric levels rose. Organisms that had evolved exquisite adaptations to oxygen-free living found those adaptations suddenly worthless. The extinction played out over millennia. Populations collapsed, entire lineages vanished. Anaerobic organisms retreated to oxygen-depleted refuges, deep ocean sediments, buried soils, stagnant swamps, the guts of other organisms. They survive in these niches today, evolutionary refugees from a world that no longer exists. But extinction creates opportunity. While obligate anaerobes died, other organisms adapted. Some bacteria evolved enzymes, catalase and superoxide dismutase, that could neutralize oxygen's toxic effects. These oxygen-tolerant species could survive in environments that killed their competitors. They inherited the Earth. Others went further. They evolved aerobic respiration, metabolic pathways that use oxygen to break down glucose, extracting far more energy than anaerobic processes could provide. Aerobic respiration generates approximately 18 times more ATP, cellular energy currency, than anaerobic fermentation. This energy surplus would ultimately enable the evolution of larger, more complex organisms, but that wouldn't happen for another billion years. The Great Oxidation Event also transformed Earth's atmosphere and climate in profound ways. Methane had been a major component of the atmosphere, produced by methane-generating archaea and maintained at high levels because oxygen wasn't present to break it down. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas, far more effective at trapping heat than carbon dioxide. It kept early Earth warm despite the sun being 20 to 30% dimmer than today. When oxygen levels rose, methane reacted with it, forming carbon dioxide and water. Methane concentrations plummeted. Earth's greenhouse effect weakened dramatically. The Huronian glaciation, a series of ice ages that lasted from approximately 2.4 to 2.1 billion years ago, was one of the longest and most severe glaciation events in Earth's history. Ice sheets extended from the poles towards the equator, possibly covering the entire planet in a snowball Earth scenario. Life survived, it always survives, but it was pushed to the margins. Photosynthetic organisms persisted beneath ice where enough sunlight penetrated. Hydrothermal communities continued unaffected in the deep ocean. Evolution slowed, but didn't stop. Eventually, volcanic outgassing replenished atmospheric carbon dioxide, which isn't destroyed by oxygen. CO2 accumulated over millions of years until greenhouse warming overcame the ice albedo feedback. The glaciers retreated, the ocean thawed, life expanded again. But Earth had fundamentally changed. The atmosphere now contained oxygen, not much by modern standards, but enough to begin forming an ozone layer in the upper atmosphere. Ozone, O3, absorbs ultraviolet radiation, protecting the surface from the mutagenic UV rays that had bombarded Earth since its formation. For the first time, shallow water and even land surfaces became potentially habitable, without the risk of radiation damage destroying cellular machinery. The stage was set for the next great innovation: complex cells. Around 2 billion years ago, somewhere in Earth's ocean, one single-celled organism attempted to eat another. This wasn't unusual. Predation had evolved long before. Some bacteria had developed the ability to engulf and digest other cells, extracting their nutrients. Most of these predation events ended with the prey being broken down and consumed. But this time, something went wrong, or rather, something went unexpectedly right. The predator engulfed its prey, likely an anaerobic bacterium capable of using oxygen for respiration, but instead of digesting it, the cellular machinery failed to complete the process. The prey remained intact within a membrane-bound compartment within the predator's cell. Under normal circumstances, the prey would die and be absorbed, but in this case, the prey continued living. It continued performing anaerobic respiration, generating ATP from oxygen and glucose, and critically, some of that energy leaked across the membrane to the host cell. This created a mutualistic relationship. The prey, now an endosymbiont, received protection and a steady supply of nutrients from the host. The host received abundant energy from the endosymbiont's efficient anaerobic metabolism. Over generations, this arrangement became permanent. The endosymbiont lost genes for functions now provided by the host: cell wall synthesis, nutrient acquisition, reproduction machinery. The host became dependent on the endosymbiont's energy production. Neither could survive independently. The endosymbiont evolved into an organelle, a specialized structure within the cell. We call it a mitochondrion. The host became the first eukaryote, a fundamentally new type of cell with internal compartmentalization, membrane-bound organelles, and far greater organizational complexity than any prokaryote. Mitochondria retain evidence of their bacterial ancestry. They have their own DNA, small circular genomes similar to bacterial chromosomes. They reproduce independently within cells by binary fission, just like bacteria. Their internal membranes resemble bacterial cell membranes. They're evolutionary fossils, bacteria frozen in symbiosis. A similar event occurred later when some eukaryotes engulfed cyanobacteria. The cyanobacteria became chloroplasts, organelles that perform photosynthesis in plant cells. This is why plants and algae can harness sunlight. They contain enslaved bacteria that retained photosynthetic ability. But the acquisition of mitochondria was the crucial innovation. Mitochondria provided eukaryotic cells with an energy surplus that prokaryotes couldn't match. This surplus could be invested in larger cell size, more complex internal structures, more sophisticated regulation of cellular processes. The first eukaryotes remained single-celled for hundreds of millions of years. They were larger than prokaryotes, sometimes 10 to 100 times larger in volume, but they still lived as independent organisms, floating in the ocean or crawling along the seafloor. They evolved nuclei, membrane-bound compartments housing their genetic material. This allowed separation of transcription, DNA to RNA, from translation, RNA to protein, enabling more sophisticated gene regulation. They evolved complex cytoskeletons, internal frameworks of protein filaments that could change shape, move organelles, and even enable cell movement using structures like cilia and flagella that were far more complex than bacterial versions. They evolved sexual reproduction, the fusion of two cells to create offspring with genetic material from both parents. This innovation dramatically accelerated evolution by mixing genetic variations and creating new combinations that selection could act upon. But for the next billion years, eukaryotes remained rare and relatively unchanged. The fossil record from 1.8 to 0.8 billion years ago shows little diversification, little innovation, little apparent evolution. Scientists call this period the Boring Billion. The name Boring Billion is slightly unfair. Evolution continued during this period. It always does, but the pace slowed dramatically. For 1,000 million years, longer than the entire span from the first dinosaurs to today, life seems to plateau. Prokaryotes still dominated most environments. Eukaryotes existed but remained uncommon and ecologically marginal. No multicellular organisms, no complex life, no dramatic innovations visible in the fossil record. Why did evolution stall? One hypothesis points to ocean chemistry. During the Boring Billion, oxygen levels rose, but then stabilized at low levels, perhaps 1 to 10% of modern atmospheric concentrations. This was enough to poison anaerobic organisms, but not enough to support large, active multicellular life. The ocean remained largely stratified. Surface waters contained some dissolved oxygen, supporting aerobic organisms. But below a few hundred meters, the ocean was anoxic, oxygen-free, creating a vast zone where only anaerobic metabolism was possible. Nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen were scarce, limiting biological productivity. Without abundant nutrients, ecosystems couldn't support large populations or complex food webs. Earth's tectonic activity decreased during this period. Fewer volcanoes meant fewer outgassing, less nutrient cycling, less disturbance to drive evolutionary innovation. The climate stabilized. After the dramatic swings of the Huronian glaciation, Earth entered a long period of relative climatic calm. Temperatures were moderate. Ice ages didn't occur. Without environmental stress driving adaptation, evolution drifted rather than raced. But beneath this apparent stagnation, crucial developments were occurring. Eukaryotic cells were experimenting with multicellularity, the ability of multiple cells to stick together and cooperate. Some algae formed simple filaments. Some amoeba-like organisms created temporary aggregations when food was scarce. These early attempts at multicellularity were tentative, reversible. Cells could separate and return to independent living when conditions changed. But they demonstrated that cooperation was possible, that cells could specialize for different functions, that division of labor could provide advantages. Genetic innovations accumulated slowly. Gene duplication events created multiple copies of genes that could then evolve different functions. Regulatory networks became more sophisticated, allowing cells to differentiate into specialized types while retaining the same genome. Sexual reproduction became more common, spreading through eukaryotic lineages and creating the genetic diversity that would fuel later evolutionary radiations. And then, around 800 million years ago, Earth's long calm ended. Earth froze. Not partially, not just at the poles. The entire planet, from equator to ice caps, was encased in ice, potentially hundreds of meters thick. This is the Cryogenian period, the time of ice generation, and it represents the most severe glaciation in Earth's entire history. The cause remains debated, but the most widely accepted hypothesis involves the supercontinent Rodinia breaking apart. As continents rifted and separated, weathering of fresh exposed rock consumed atmospheric carbon dioxide. CO2 levels dropped. Without sufficient greenhouse gases to retain heat, temperatures plummeted. Ice formed at high latitudes and began spreading equatorward. Ice reflects sunlight. It has high albedo, so as ice coverage increased, more solar energy was reflected back into space rather than absorbed. This created a runaway feedback loop. More ice means lower temperatures, which creates more ice, which lowers temperatures further. Within thousands of years, an eye blink in geological time, Earth transformed from a temperate world to a frozen wasteland. Photosynthesis largely ceased. With the ocean covered by ice, sunlight couldn't penetrate to the water below except in thin zones near the equator or near volcanic hotspots. Productivity collapsed. Food webs disintegrated. Most species went extinct. But life survived. How could anything survive hundreds of meters of ice covering the entire planet? Volcanic activity continued beneath the ice. Hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor pumped heat and nutrients into isolated pockets of liquid water. Microbial communities clustered around these vents, deriving energy from chemicals rather than sunlight. Near the equator, where sunlight intensity was strongest, thin zones of liquid water may have persisted beneath the ice. Photosynthetic organisms survived in these refuges, maintaining minimal populations until conditions improved. And critically, volcanoes continued erupting, releasing carbon dioxide. But with the planet frozen, weathering stopped. CO2 wasn't being consumed by rock weathering or absorbed by plant photosynthesis. It accumulated in the atmosphere. For millions of years, volcanic outgassing slowly increased atmospheric CO2 concentrations. Eventually, around 635 million years ago, CO2 levels reached a critical threshold. Greenhouse warming overcame the ice albedo feedback. The ice began to melt. Once melting started, the process reversed rapidly. Another runaway feedback loop, but in the opposite direction. Less ice meant more sunlight absorbed, which meant higher temperatures, which meant faster melting. Within perhaps 10,000 years, Earth swung from completely frozen to extremely hot, a super greenhouse state with CO2 levels far higher than before the glaciation. Temperatures soared. The ocean surface reached temperatures that would have been lethal to most organisms. But life, compressed into tiny refuges for millions of years, exploded outward. The world that emerged from the ice was unrecognizable. Ocean chemistry had changed. The freeze-thaw cycle had disrupted nutrient cycling, stirring deep ocean waters and bringing phosphorus and other nutrients to the surface. Productivity spiked. Photosynthetic organisms bloomed across newly ice-free seas. And for the first time in Earth's history, complex multicellular organisms began to diversify. In the Flinders Ranges of South Australia, in a geological formation called the Ediacaran Hills, paleontologists have discovered some of the strangest fossils ever found. Imprinted in sandstone beds 565 to 541 million years old are the preserved shapes of organisms unlike anything alive today. Dickinsonia appears as a flat, oval, quilted organism, ranging from a few millimeters to over a meter in length. It has no obvious head, no limbs, no internal organs visible in the fossils. It seems to have lain on the seafloor like a living carpet, possibly absorbing nutrients directly through its body surface. Charnia resembles a fern frond, branching, fractal-like structures anchored to the seafloor. But these weren't plants. They lived underwater, in darkness, beyond the reach of sunlight. How they obtained energy remains mysterious. Tribridium displays threefold symmetry, unlike the bilateral or radial symmetry of modern animals. It looks like nothing that exists today, suggesting body plans that evolution tried and later abandoned. Cambrian shows evidence of bilateral symmetry and directional movement, with scratch marks on the sediment suggesting it grazed on microbial mats. This might represent an early ancestor of bilaterians, the vast group that includes most modern animals. The Ediacaran organisms, named after the Ediacaran Hills where they were first discovered, represent Earth's first experiment with complex multicellular life. They had no hard parts, no shells, no bones, no teeth. They appear soft-bodied, made of tissues so delicate that fossilization required unusual conditions, rapid burial in fine sediment, absence of scavengers, microbial mats that created impressions before decay. Their ecology remains puzzling. Most appear sessile, attached to the seafloor or lying motionless. Few show evidence of predation or defense mechanisms. They seem to have lived in a world without predators, absorbing nutrients from water or microbial mats, growing slowly, dying and being buried gently. This is sometimes called the Garden of Ediacaran, a peaceful ecosystem where organisms didn't need to run, fight, or hide. Competition existed, but violence didn't. But peace wouldn't last. Around 550 million years ago, the first small shelly fossils appear, tiny tubes and caps and spines made of calcium carbonate or calcium phosphate. These represent the earliest known mineralized skeletons. Why did organisms begin building shells? The most compelling hypothesis: defense. Something was eating them. Predation was evolving, and predation would drive the greatest explosion of evolutionary innovation in Earth's history. 541 million years ago marks the beginning of the Cambrian period and the beginning of an evolutionary revolution so dramatic that Darwin himself called it a mystery that threatened his entire theory. In approximately 20 to 25 million years, an eye blink in geological terms, virtually every major animal body plan that exists today appeared in the fossil record. Arthropods with jointed legs and compound eyes, mollusks with shells, annelid worms with segmented bodies, echinoderms with radial symmetry, chordates with primitive notochords, flexible rods that would eventually evolve into vertebrate spines.
This isn't gradual evolution. This is explosion. In the Burgess Shale of British Columbia, in the Changjiang deposits of China, in Sirius Passet in Greenland, paleontologists have uncovered extraordinarily preserved fossils that capture this moment of evolutionary frenzy. Trilobites scuttled across the seafloor on multiple jointed legs, their compound eyes, among the most complex eyes ever evolved, providing 360-degree vision. Their hard exoskeletons, made of calcium carbonate reinforced with calcite, provided protection from predators. When threatened, they could roll into balls like modern pill bugs. Analemolcaris grew to over a meter in length, enormous by Cambrian standards, becoming the apex predator of early Cambrian seas. It had a circular mouth lined with plates, grasping appendages for capturing prey, and sophisticated eyes on stalks. This was the first super predator, and its presence drove evolutionary arms races. Wiwaxia bristled with protective spines, armoring a slug-like body that grazed on seafloor detritus. Opabinia had 5 eyes and a bizarre frontal appendage ending in a claw, a body plan so strange that when it was first reconstructed, the audience at a scientific conference laughed, thinking it was a joke. Hallucigenia walked on paired steins or tubes. Paleontologists initially reconstructed it upside down, with tentacles or feeding structures on its back or belly, depending on interpretation.
These organisms weren't ancestral prototypes. They were sophisticated, specialized, and in many cases represent body plans that have no modern descendants. Evolution was experimenting wildly, trying countless variations, most of which would eventually go extinct. What triggered this explosion? Multiple factors converged. Oxygen levels reached critical thresholds, approximately 10 to 15% of modern atmospheric concentrations, that could support active, mobile, energy-intensive organisms with high metabolic demands. Predation created intense selective pressure. Once some organisms evolved the ability to hunt and eat others, prey species had to evolve defenses or go extinct. This triggered escalating arms races. Better predators drove better defenses, which drove better hunting strategies, cycling upward in complexity. Genetic innovations, particularly the evolution of Hox genes, master regulatory genes that control body segmentation and organ placement, allowed organisms to experiment with new body plans rapidly. Small changes in Hox gene expression could produce dramatically different body architectures. Environmental changes, continental breakup, ocean chemistry shifts, climate fluctuations created new habitats and opportunities for diversification. Vision evolved independently multiple times during the Cambrian. Eyes allowed organisms to detect predators from a distance, to hunt actively rather than ambush opportunistically, to navigate complex environments. The evolutionary advantage of sight triggered cascading changes throughout ecosystems. The Cambrian explosion wasn't just about diversity, it was about complexity. It was about the evolution of ecological relationships, predator-prey dynamics, symbiosis, competition, cooperation that would define all future evolution. And it was about something else too. Suffering and death entered the world not as abstract concepts, but as daily realities. Organisms were being eaten. They experienced pain, fear, the struggle to survive another day. Evolution had accelerated from gentle drift to fierce competition. Life would never be simple again. For 3 billion years, life existed only in water. Stand on a Cambrian beach 500 million years ago and look inland. What you see is desolation. Bare rock, barren sand, volcanic plains baked under ultraviolet radiation. The landscape is painted in shades of gray, brown, and black. No green anywhere. No trees, no grass, no flowers buzzing, no insects buzzing, no birds singing, just wind-sculpted stone and silence. The land was sterile not because it was hostile to life. Temperatures were moderate, water existed in rivers and lakes, but because nothing had evolved the adaptations necessary to survive there. Water provides support. On land, organisms must support their own weight against gravity. Water provides constant moisture. On land, organisms risk desiccation. Water filters ultraviolet radiation. On land, organisms need specialized transport systems. Life had evolved exquisite adaptations for aquatic existence, but possessed none of the tools required for terrestrial survival. Until around 470 million years ago, when the first pioneers emerged. Bryophytes, mosses and their relatives, were the first plants to colonize land. They didn't look impressive. Tiny green organisms, rarely taller than a few centimeters, clinging to rocks near shorelines where moisture persisted. They had no true roots, just rhizoids, hair-like structures that anchored them to substrate. They had no vascular tissue, no xylem to transport water, or phloem to distribute nutrients. They couldn't grow tall because they lacked structural support and internal plumbing. But they could photosynthesize in air, and that single capability opened an entirely new world. Photosynthesis on land was more efficient than in water. Atmospheric CO2 concentrations were higher than dissolved CO2 in seawater. Light wasn't filtered by water depth. Space was unlimited, no competition for vertical position like in dense algal mats. These early land plants spread along coastlines, riverbanks, and lakeshores. They grew wherever water was available at least part of the time. And when they died, their decomposition created something Earth had never possessed before: soil. Soil isn't just dirt. Soil is a complex ecosystem, a mixture of mineral particles, organic matter, microorganisms, and chemical gradients. Before plants, Earth had regolith, weathered rock fragments, but not soil in the biological sense. Fungi colonized land alongside plants, forming symbiotic relationships. Fungal networks called mycorrhizae penetrated plant tissues and extended into surrounding substrate, increasing the plant's ability to absorb water and nutrients. In exchange, plants provided fungi with sugars from photosynthesis. This partnership between plants and fungi was so successful that it persists today. Over 90% of modern plant species form mycorrhizal associations. We think of plants as independent organisms, but they're actually composite beings, unable to survive without their fungal partners. By 320 million years ago, vascular plants had evolved. Cooksonia, one of the earliest known vascular plants, stood about 10 centimeters tall with simple branching stems and spore-producing structures at the tips. It had primitive xylem, cells with reinforced walls that could transport water and provide structural support. This innovation allowed plants to grow taller, to reach above their neighbors toward sunlight, to transport water from soil to leaves that might be dozens of centimeters above ground. The evolutionary race toward height had begun. By 390 million years ago, forests existed. These weren't forests as we know them. The trees were giant ferns, club mosses, and horsetails, some reaching 30 meters in height. Archaeopteris, one of the first tree-like plants, had a woody trunk, complex branching, and leaves that captured sunlight with unprecedented efficiency. These forests transformed Earth's atmosphere. Photosynthesis by land plants drew down atmospheric CO2 and released oxygen on a scale that dwarfed oceanic photosynthesis. Oxygen levels climbed to approximately 35% of atmospheric composition by the late Devonian and Carboniferous periods, the highest concentration in Earth's history. High oxygen levels had profound consequences. Forest fires burned with extraordinary intensity. Insect respiration, which relies on passive diffusion rather than active breathing, became more efficient, allowing insects to grow to enormous sizes. Dragonflies with 70-centimeter wings spanned patrolled these ancient forests. Millipedes grew to over 2 meters in length. But plants alone didn't green the earth. They needed animals to complete the transformation. The first animals to venture onto land weren't vertebrates, they were arthropods, creatures with jointed legs and external skeletons that had dominated Cambrian oceans. Around 430 million years ago, fossils show millipede-like organisms in Scotland, Pneumodismus, that possessed spiracles, breathing holes that allowed air exchange. This is the earliest evidence of fully terrestrial animals. Why did arthropods make the transition before vertebrates? Their exoskeletons provided crucial advantages on land. The hard external covering prevented water loss, a critical adaptation in air where desiccation is a constant threat. It provided structural support without needing an internal skeleton, and it offered protection from the intense UV radiation that still bombarded the surface. Early terrestrial arthropods likely scavenged on decaying plant material accumulating along shorelines. As plant diversity increased, arthropods diversified alongside them. Some became herbivores, feeding on living plant tissue. Others became predators, hunting the herbivores. Scorpions appeared around 420 million years ago, initially aquatic but quickly adapting to terrestrial life. Spiders evolved around 380 million years ago, developing silk production, protein fibers that could be used for building shelters, capturing prey, and creating egg cases. By 360 million years ago, complete terrestrial ecosystems existed. Decomposers broke down dead plant material. Herbivores fed on living plants. Predators hunted the herbivores. Fungi recycled nutrients. Complex food webs had established themselves on land. But the vertebrates were still in the water, still breathing through gills, still laying eggs that required aquatic environments. Organisms with advantages produced more offspring. Those offspring inherited the advantageous mutation. Over generations, the population evolved. This is natural selection. This is evolution, and it has been operating continuously for 3.8 billion years, shaping every organism that has ever existed, including you. For the next billion years, life remains invisible to any hypothetical observer. No plants, no animals, no fungi. Just single-celled organisms too small to see without a microscope, floating in the ocean, clinging to rocks, thriving in conditions that would be lethal to almost everything alive today. These early organisms were prokaryotes, cells without nuclei or membrane-bound internal structures. Simple in architecture, but sophisticated in chemistry. They evolved an astonishing diversity of metabolic strategies, finding ways to extract energy from nearly every available chemical gradient in their environment. Some organisms became chemotrophs, harvesting energy from chemical reactions. They consumed hydrogen sulfide bubbling from volcanic vents, or methane seeping from the seafloor, or iron dissolved in seawater. They built their bodies from carbon dioxide and minerals, creating organic molecules from inorganic materials. Others became phototrophs, capturing energy from sunlight. The earliest photosynthetic organisms used hydrogen sulfide or hydrogen gas instead of water, releasing sulfur or nothing at all instead of oxygen. They colonized shallow waters where sunlight penetrated, forming thin mats that trapped sediment and built stromatolites, those layered structures we find fossilized in ancient rocks. These microbial mats weren't random collections of cells. They were communities, ecosystems in miniature. Different species occupied different layers based on light availability, oxygen tolerance, and nutrient requirements. The surface layer contained photosynthesizers. Beneath them lived organisms that consumed their waste products. Deeper still were anaerobic species that thrived in anaerobic darkness. Competition drove innovation. Cells that could replicate faster, survive harsher conditions, or exploit new resources outcompeted their neighbors. Horizontal gene transfer, the direct swapping of genetic material between organisms, allowed successful innovations to spread rapidly through populations. Some cells developed flagella, whip-like tails that enabled movement toward food or away from danger. Others evolved protective capsules or formed spores that could survive desiccation and extreme temperatures. Still others discovered how to live inside rocks, boring into mineral grains to escape ultraviolet radiation. By 3 billion years ago, microbial life had colonized virtually every aquatic environment on Earth. Organisms thrived in boiling volcanic springs and beneath Antarctic ice. They lived in acid mine drainage with pH levels that would dissolve metal, and in alkaline soda lakes caustic enough to burn skin. They survived in salt deposits so concentrated that water couldn't exist in liquid form, entering dormancy for millions of years until rare moisture returned. Life wasn't fragile. Life was relentless. But the most important innovation was still developing. Somewhere in the shallow oceans, a type of bacteria was evolving a new form of photosynthesis that would fundamentally transform Earth forever. Cyanobacteria don't look revolutionary, Under a microscope, they appear as simple chains or spherical clusters of cells, tinted blue-green by photosynthetic pigments. Some species form filaments, others create colonies. Most are so small that thousands could fit on a pinhead. But these unremarkable organisms developed a chemical innovation that would become one of the most consequential evolutionary events in Earth's history. Earlier photosynthetic bacteria used hydrogen sulfide or ferrous iron as electron donors, chemical sources abundant near volcanic vents, but rare in most environments. This limitation restricted where photosynthesis could occur. Cyanobacteria evolved a different approach. They learned to split water molecules, H2O, using energy from sunlight. This process, called oxygenic photosynthesis, extracts electrons from water to power the creation of organic molecules from carbon dioxide. Water is abundant everywhere in the ocean. By using water instead of rare chemicals, cyanobacteria could photosynthesize anywhere sunlight reached. This gave them an enormous competitive advantage. But there was a byproduct, a waste product released during water-splitting photosynthesis: oxygen. For Earth's existing organisms, oxygen wasn't just unnecessary, it was toxic. Oxygen is one of the most reactive elements in the periodic table. It strips electrons from organic molecules, generating destructive free radicals that damage DNA, proteins, and cell membranes. In high concentrations, oxygen is a powerful poison. For billions of years, Earth's atmosphere and oceans contained virtually no free oxygen. Life evolved in an oxygen-free world, developing metabolic pathways that couldn't tolerate oxygen's corrosive chemistry. Most organisms were obligate anaerobes, species that die in oxygen's presence. Their transition to land would be slower, more gradual, and ultimately more consequential for the history of life. In 2004, paleontologist Neil Shubin and his team were excavating on Ellesmere Island in the Canadian Arctic. They were searching for fossils and rocks dated to approximately 375 million years ago, the Devonian period, when fish dominated the oceans but terrestrial vertebrates hadn't yet evolved. They were looking for transition forms, evidence of how vertebrates made the journey from water to land. What they found exceeded expectations. Tiktaalik, named from the Inuktitut word for large, shallow water fish, was a meter-long predator preserved in exquisite detail. It had scales, gills, and fins like a fish, but it also had features no fish possessed: a neck. Fish don't have necks. Their skulls are rigidly connected to their shoulder girdles. But Tiktaalik could move its head independently of its body, allowing it to track prey or look around without turning its entire body. Eyes on top of its skull, like a crocodile, rather than on the sides, like most fish. This positioning suggests it spent time at the water's surface, looking upward and forward rather than laterally. Lungs as well as gills. Tiktaalik could breathe air when dissolved oxygen in water was low, or when stranded in shallow pools. And most remarkably, front fins containing bones homologous to the bones in your arm. Humerus, radius, ulna. The same architecture that supports your hand is visible in Tiktaalik's fin. The fin even contained primitive wrist bones. Tiktaalik could do push-ups. It could prop itself up on its front fins, supporting its body weight, allowing it to rest in shallow water, or even venture briefly onto mudflats. Why would a fish evolve such features? The Devonian period experienced dramatic environmental fluctuations. Shallow seas and estuaries experienced seasonal droughts. Fish populations became isolated in shrinking pools where oxygen levels dropped dangerously low. The ability to breathe air, to crawl overland to deeper water provided enormous survival advantages. Natural selection favored fish with stronger fins, more efficient lungs, and better tolerance for air exposure. Over millions of years, populations evolved features that made them progressively more capable of terrestrial locomotion. Tiktaalik wasn't alone. The fossil record from this period shows multiple lineages experimenting with land invasion. Panderichthys, Eustenopteron, and other lobe-finned fish evolved similar adaptations independently. By 365 million years ago, true tetrapods, four-legged vertebrates, had appeared. Acanthostega had 8 digits on each limb and functional gills, indicating it remained primarily aquatic. But it had recognizable legs with wrists, ankles, and toes. Structures evolved for walking, even though Acanthostega probably used them for underwater locomotion initially. Ichthyostega was slightly more terrestrial, with stronger limbs and a more robust ribcage that could support its weight in air. But it retained a fish-like tail and likely spent much of its time in water. These weren't fish, and they weren't fully terrestrial vertebrates. They were something in between, transition forms that evolution predicted must exist and fossils confirmed. Over the next 40 million years, tetrapods diversified dramatically. The Carboniferous period, named for the vast coal deposits formed from its forests, was the age of amphibians. Walk through a Carboniferous forest 340 million years ago, and you enter a world stranger than any fantasy. The trees aren't trees in the modern sense. They're giant club mosses, Lepidodendron and Sigillaria, with straight trunks covered in diamond-patterned bark, reaching 30 to 40 meters tall. Their leaves cluster at the crown, giving them palm-like silhouettes. When they die, they don't rot quickly like modern trees. Fungi haven't yet evolved efficient lignin-degrading enzymes. Dead trunks accumulate in swamps, compressing over millions of years into the coal deposits that powered the Industrial Revolution. Giant horsetails, calamites, grow in dense stands along waterways. Tree ferns spread broad fronds in the understory. The forest floor is carpeted with ferns, mosses, and early seed plants. The air is thick with moisture and oxygen, 35% O2 compared to today's 21%. Dragonflies the size of hawks patrol the canopy. Millipedes as long as alligators scuttle through the leaf litter. Scorpions as large as house cats hunt in the shadows. And in the swamps and rivers beneath these forests, amphibians reign supreme. Eriops, a 2-meter-long predator, resembles a massive salamander with a flat crocodilian skull lined with sharp teeth. It hunts fish in water and ventures onto land to ambush smaller tetrapods. Diplocalus has a bizarre boomerang-shaped head. Its skull extends laterally into horn-like projections. Scientists debate whether this shape provided hydrodynamic advantages for swimming or served as defense against predators. Protorogyrannus, one of the earliest reptiliomorphs, bridges the gap between amphibians and reptiles. It has stronger limbs, a more terrestrial build, and behavioral patterns suggesting it spent more time on land than its ancestors. But all these amphibians share a critical limitation. They must return to water to reproduce. Amphibian eggs are gelatinous, permeable to water and gases without protective shells. If laid on land, they dry out within hours. Embryos develop in water, hatching as aquatic larvae, tadpoles, with gills and tails. Only after metamorphosis do they develop lungs and limbs suitable for terrestrial life. This reproductive constraint tethered amphibians to aquatic environments. They could hunt on land, but they couldn't invade deserts, highlands, or areas distant from permanent water sources. Evolution was working on a solution, and around 312 million years ago, that solution appeared in a small lizard-like creature whose innovation would free vertebrates from dependence on water forever. In Nova Scotia, in the fossilized remains of ancient tree stumps, paleontologists discovered tiny skeletons. They belonged to Hylonomus, forest mouse, a 20-centimeter-long reptile that lived approximately 312 million years ago. Hylonomus is the earliest known amniote, a vertebrate that could lay eggs on land. The amniotic egg is one of evolution's most elegant innovations. Unlike amphibian eggs, amniotic eggs are enclosed in shells made of calcium carbonate or leathery membranes. The shell is waterproof, yet permeable to oxygen and carbon dioxide, allowing the embryo to breathe while preventing water loss. Inside the shell, the embryo is surrounded by 3 specialized membranes. The amnion creates a fluid-filled sac around the embryo, providing an aquatic environment even on dry land, a private pond that travels with the developing animal. The chorion lies just beneath the shell, managing gas exchange and protecting the embryo. The allantois stores metabolic waste products, preventing toxic accumulation, and assists with respiration. Additionally, the yolk sac provides nutrients for the developing embryo, eliminating the need for external feeding during development. This elegant package freed vertebrates from dependence on water for reproduction. For the first time, animals could lay eggs anywhere, in deserts, on mountaintops, in forests far from permanent streams. The evolutionary consequences were revolutionary. Amniotes diversified rapidly into every terrestrial environment. By 300 million years ago, 2 major lineages had emerged. Synapsids, characterized by a single temporal opening in the skull behind the eye socket. This lineage would eventually produce mammals, including us. And sauropsids, characterized by different skull architecture. This lineage would produce reptiles, dinosaurs, and birds. Early synapsids quickly became the dominant terrestrial vertebrates. By the Permian period, they had evolved into an astonishing variety of forms. Dimetrodon, often mistaken for a dinosaur, was actually a synapsid predator with a distinctive sail on its back, elongated vertebral spines covered with skin, possibly used for thermal regulation or display. It hunted smaller vertebrates with dagger-like teeth differentiated into incisors, canines, and molars, a mammalian trait appearing 200 million years before true mammals. Muscops, a massive herbivorous synapsid, grew to the size of a cow, with a thick skull that may have been used in headbutting contests. It grazed on the tough vegetation of Permian landscapes. Titanophonius, an apex predator from Russia, reached 3 meters in length with massive jaws capable of crushing bone. For 80 million years, synapsids dominated terrestrial ecosystems. They evolved towards increasingly mammal-like characteristics, differentiated teeth, more efficient jaw mechanics, evidence of whiskers suggesting fur, more upright limb posture. They were successful, diverse, and globally distributed. The ancestors of all mammals, including us, were thriving. And then, 252 million years ago, the world nearly ended. The Permian-Triassic extinction event killed approximately 96% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species. Scientists call it the Great Dying.
What could cause such catastrophic extinction? In Siberia, volcanic eruptions began on a scale almost impossible to comprehend. The Siberian Traps, named for the steppe-like landscape created by erosion of layered basalt flows, covered an area of 7 million square kilometers, roughly the size of Australia. This wasn't a single volcano. It was an entire province erupting simultaneously from hundreds of vents, pouring lava across the landscape in pulses over approximately 1 million years. Individual lava flows extended for hundreds of kilometers. The total volume of erupted material exceeded 1 million cubic kilometers, enough to bury the entire United States under 130 meters of basalt. But the lava wasn't the killer. The gases were.
Volcanic eruptions released massive quantities of sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, and other gases into the atmosphere. SO2 created aerosols that blocked sunlight, causing short-term cooling, but the long-term effect was warming as CO2 accumulated. Global temperatures rose by 8 to 10 degrees Celsius. Ocean temperatures increased to 40 degrees Celsius in some regions, too hot for most marine life to survive. The warming triggered feedback loops. Methane hydrates, frozen methane deposits on the ocean floor, destabilized as temperatures rose, releasing even more greenhouse gases. This created a runaway warming that pushed the climate system past multiple tipping points. Ocean chemistry changed dramatically. Dissolved oxygen levels plummeted as warm water holds less gas. The ocean became acidic as CO2 dissolved into seawater, forming carbonic acid. Marine organisms with calcium carbonate shells couldn't maintain their structures in acidic conditions. On land, acid rain corroded vegetation. Wildfires swept across continents, ignited by lightning and volcanic activity. Ozone layer depletion allowed increased UV radiation to reach the surface, damaging DNA in organisms that survived the initial warming. The extinction didn't happen overnight. It played out over 60,000 to 200,000 years, rapid in geological terms, but spanning thousands of generations for the organisms experiencing it. Ecosystems collapsed from the bottom up. Photosynthetic organisms died as oceans acidified and atmospheric dust blocked sunlight. Herbivores starved. Carnivores starved. Species that survived the initial climate shock succumbed to starvation as food webs disintegrated. The synapsids, Earth's dominant terrestrial vertebrates for 80 million years, were devastated. Most lineages went completely extinct. Only a handful of small generalist species survived in isolated refugia, areas that retained marginally habitable conditions. The aftermath was a depleted world. For millions of years, ecosystems remained simplified, dominated by a few disaster species. Organisms adapted to tolerate extreme conditions and rapid reproduction in unstable environments. The Lystrosaurus, a pig-sized herbivore synapsid, became temporarily the most common land vertebrate on Earth, making up over 90% of fossil specimens from the early Triassic period. This wasn't success, it was survival in a broken world. But in the wreckage of Permian ecosystems, new opportunities emerged for the lineages that survived. The sauropsids, the reptile lineage, had been secondary players during the Permian, living in the shadows of dominant synapsids. But they weathered the extinction better, and in the recovery period, they radiated into every available ecological role. Some evolved into archosaurs, ruling reptiles, characterized by specialized ankle joints and skull openings that reduced weight while maintaining strength. The archosaurs would diversify into crocodilians, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs. The age of synapsid dominance was over. The age of dinosaurs was beginning. The first dinosaurs weren't impressive. They were small, most species no larger than dogs, and rare, making up perhaps 1 to 2% of the fauna in late Triassic ecosystems around 230 million years ago. Eoraptor, one of the earliest known dinosaurs from Argentina, was a meter-long omnivore that scurried through the undergrowth eating plants, insects, and small vertebrates. Herosaurus, slightly larger, was a primitive predator with sharp teeth and grasping hands. These early dinosaurs competed with other archosaur groups, Rauisicans, Adasaurs, and Phytosaurs, that were larger, more diverse, and more ecologically dominant. There was no indication that dinosaurs would eventually rule the planet. Then, 201 million years ago, another mass extinction, the Triassic-Jurassic extinction event, eliminated most of the competing archosaur groups. Massive volcanic eruptions associated with the breakup of the supercontinent Pangaea triggered climate change and environmental collapse similar to the Permian extinction, though less severe. Dinosaurs survived, possibly due to their smaller size, lower metabolic requirements, or behavioral flexibility. In the aftermath, they radiated rapidly into vacant ecological roles. By the Jurassic period, dinosaurs dominated terrestrial ecosystems worldwide. Sauropods, long-necked herbivores, evolved to enormous sizes. Brachiosaurus stood 13 meters tall and weighed 60 tons, using its elongated neck to browse on high vegetation inaccessible to other herbivores. Diplodocus reached 27 meters in length with a whip-like tail that could be cracked like a sonic boom to deter predators. How could animals achieve such size? Several factors converged. High oxygen levels, though lower than the Carboniferous, still elevated compared to today, supported large body sizes with high metabolic demands. Efficient respiratory systems. Dinosaurs possessed air sacs that created one-way airflow through lungs, similar to modern birds, extracting oxygen more efficiently than mammalian lungs. Hollow bones reduced weight while maintaining strength, allowing massive bodies to remain mobile. Long necks allowed access to food sources without moving their enormous bodies, reducing energy expenditure. Theropods, bipedal predators, evolved alongside herbivores in an escalating arms race. Allosaurus, the apex predator of the late Jurassic, reached 9 meters in length with serrated teeth and powerful jaws that could bite through bone.
By the Cretaceous period, dinosaurs had conquered every terrestrial environment. Hadrosaurs, duck-billed dinosaurs, evolved elaborate crests containing nasal passages that may have produced resonant calls for communication. Ceratopsians, like Triceratops, developed massive bony frills and horns for defense and display. Ankylosaurs armored themselves with osteoderms, bony plates embedded in skin, and wielded tail clubs that could shatter bone. And in the shadows of these giants, a group of small theropods was evolving something unprecedented: feathers. The evolution of feathers occurred gradually, over tens of millions of years. Early feathers weren't for flight, they were for insulation and display. Sinosauropteryx, a 1-meter-long predator from China dated to 125 million years ago, was covered in simple filamentous protofeathers. Later species evolved more complex feathers with veins and barbs. Some used them for gliding, others for display and mating rituals. Eventually, some lineages evolved powered flight. Archaeopteryx, living 150 million years ago, represents a transition form, with feathers, wings, and flight capability, but also teeth, clawed fingers, and a long, bony tail. It was clearly a dinosaur, but it could fly. Birds are dinosaurs, not descendants of dinosaurs, not evolved from dinosaurs. They are dinosaurs, the only lineage that survived to the present day. For 165 million years, dinosaurs dominated every terrestrial environment on Earth. They weren't evolutionary dead ends or obsolete failures doomed to extinction. They were magnificently adapted, filling ecological roles with precision and efficiency. Some were solitary hunters. Others lived in vast herds that migrated seasonally across continents. Some were likely warm-blooded with complex social behaviors. Evidence suggests parental care, adults protecting nests, feeding young, teaching behaviors. If not for cosmic chance, dinosaurs might still dominate today. Instead, 66 million years ago, a rock from space changed everything forever. The asteroid was approximately 10 to 15 kilometers in diameter, about the size of Mount Everest. It had been orbiting the Sun for billions of years in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Then something, a collision with another asteroid, a gravitational perturbation from Jupiter, altered its orbit. The asteroid fell sunward, crossing Earth's orbital path.
On a day 66 million years ago that started like any other, the asteroid entered Earth's atmosphere, traveling at 20 kilometers per second, over 70,000 kilometers per hour. The impact site was a shallow sea off the Yucatan Peninsula in what is now Mexico. The asteroid struck with energy equivalent to 10 billion Hiroshima bombs. The first millisecond, the asteroid vaporized completely, along with thousands of cubic kilometers of rock, seawater, and sediment. The impact generated temperatures exceeding 10,000 degrees Celsius, hotter than the surface of the sun. A pressure wave propagated outward at hypersonic speeds, pulverizing everything in its path. The shock wave created winds exceeding 1,000 kilometers per hour. Within seconds, every organism within 1,500 kilometers was dead. The impact excavated a crater 150 kilometers wide and 20 kilometers deep. Millions of tons of vaporized rock, melted glass beads called tektites, and superheated debris ejected into the atmosphere. Some debris reached escape velocity, flying into space before falling back to Earth. Globally, this falling debris re-entered the atmosphere, heating it to oven-like temperatures. The sky glowed red. Thermal radiation ignited wildfires across entire continents. Forests burned from North America to Asia. Earthquakes exceeding magnitude 10 rippled around the planet. Tsunamis hundreds of meters tall devastated coastlines worldwide. Within hours, most large animals in the Western Hemisphere were dead, killed by heat, fire, shock waves, or drowning. But the worst was yet to come. The impact threw so much dust and aerosol into the atmosphere that sunlight was blocked for months, possibly years. Global temperatures plummeted. The impact winter froze regions that had been temperate or tropical. Photosynthesis ceased. Plants died. Herbivores starved. Carnivores starved. Food chains collapsed globally. 75% of all species went extinct, including all non-avian dinosaurs. But not everything died. Small mammals survived by burrowing, hibernating, and eating seeds that remained viable in soil. Crocodilians and turtles with slow metabolisms and ability to survive long periods without food endured. Some bird lineages persisted. Fish in isolated waterways survived. In the aftermath, Earth was transformed. The dominant terrestrial vertebrates for 165 million years were gone. The ecological roles they filled, massive herbivores, apex predators, mid-sized browsers, were suddenly vacant. And in those vacant roles, a group of small, furry, nocturnal creatures that had lived in dinosaur shadows for 150 million years found opportunity. Mammals, our ancestors. In the darkness following the asteroid impact, beneath ash-covered landscapes and burned forests, small furry shapes emerged from burrows. Mammals had existed for over 150 million years, since the Triassic period, but had remained marginal throughout the age of dinosaurs. Most were small, nocturnal insectivores no larger than rats. They lived in the shadows, literally and figuratively, scurrying through underbrush at night while dinosaurs dominated daylight ecosystems. But the asteroid changed everything. With dinosaurs gone, ecological roles opened like vacant apartments. Herbivore niches, small, medium, and large. Predator niches, ambush hunters, pursuit hunters, apex carnivores. Arboreal niches in recovering forests. Aquatic niches in rivers and oceans. Mammals possessing several key advantages moved into these empty spaces with explosive speed. They were endothermic, warm-blooded, maintaining constant body temperature regardless of external conditions. This allowed activity in cold climates and at night, times when cold-blooded reptiles were sluggish or inactive. They had differentiated teeth, incisors for cutting, canines for piercing, molars for grinding, allowing specialized diets. Unlike reptiles with uniform teeth, mammals could efficiently process plants, meat, or both. They practiced extensive parental care, nursing young with milk and protecting them during vulnerable development. This increased offspring survival rates dramatically compared to species that laid eggs and abandoned them. They possessed relatively large brains, enabling complex behaviors, learning, and adaptation to changing environments. Within 10 million years of the extinction, a geological eye blink, mammals have diversified into dozens of orders, filling every available terrestrial and many aquatic niches. Some became gigantic. Ediacaran, a hornless rhino relative from the Oligocene, stood 5 meters at the shoulder and weighed 20 tons, the largest land mammal that ever existed, comparable in mass to 4 African elephants. Others became aerial. Bats evolved powered flight independently of birds and pterosaurs, developing echolocation that allowed navigation and hunting in complete darkness. By 50 million years ago, bats were already diversified into multiple families with sophisticated hunting strategies. Some returned to the ocean. Whales evolved from land-dwelling mammals, descendants of small deer-like creatures that ventured into water to hunt fish. Over 20 million years, they became fully aquatic, losing hind limbs, developing tail flukes, evolving blowholes. The largest animals ever to exist on Earth, blue whales reaching 30 meters and 200 tons, are mammals that went back to the sea. Others became predators. Creodonts, the dominant carnivores before modern carnivore families evolved, included species like Sarcastodon, a 3-meter-long predator with massive jaws. Later, true carnivores, cats, dogs, bears, hyenas, evolved more efficient hunting adaptations and displaced the creodonts. And in tropical forests, around 55 million years ago, a group of small mammals began experimenting with life in the trees. Primates. The earliest primates were small squirrel-like creatures resembling modern lemurs. Plesiadapis from the Paleocene epoch had grasping hands with claws, a long snout, and teeth adapted for eating insects and fruit. But living in trees imposed specific selective pressures that would shape primate evolution in consequential ways. Depth perception became critical. Misjudge the distance to a branch and you fall to your death. Primates evolved forward-facing eyes with overlapping visual fields, providing stereoscopic vision, the ability to perceive depth accurately. Color vision developed to distinguish ripe fruit among green foliage. Most mammals see only blues and yellows. Primates evolved trichromatic vision, sensitivity to red, green, and blue wavelengths, allowing precise color discrimination. Grasping hands with opposable thumbs evolved for gripping branches, claws transformed into nails, and sensitive finger pads developed providing tactile feedback for manipulating objects. Brain size increased relative to body size. Navigating three-dimensional forest canopies requires spatial reasoning, memory of food sources, social intelligence to navigate group dynamics. Primates evolved larger brains to manage these cognitive demands. By 40 million years ago, primates had split into 2 major groups: strepsirrhines, lemurs and lorises, and haplorhines, tarsiers, monkeys, and apes. Around 25 million years ago in Africa, the ape lineage diverged from Old World monkeys. Early apes like Proconsul were forest dwellers, moving through trees using all 4 limbs, eating fruit and leaves. For the next 20 million years, apes diversified across Africa, Europe, and Asia. Some lineages led to modern gibbons and orangutans. Others led to African great apes, gorillas, chimpanzees, and one lineage that would eventually produce humans. But around 23 million years ago, Earth's climate began changing in ways that would profoundly affect ape evolution. 23 million years ago, East Africa was covered in continuous forest, dense tropical and subtropical woodland stretching from coast to interior. Apes thrived in the canopy, rarely descending to the ground. Then, slowly, the forest began to shrink. The cause was tectonic. The Indian subcontinent, moving northward, collided with Asia. The impact crumpled Earth's crust, pushing up the Himalayan mountain ranges. This altered global atmospheric circulation patterns, redirecting moisture-bearing winds and creating rain shadows. Africa became drier. Forests fragmented into isolated patches separated by woodland and grassland. The transition from continuous forest to savanna mosaic accelerated between 10 and 5 million years ago. For forest-adapted apes, this was catastrophic. Their food sources, fruits, leaves, insects, depended on dense forest. As trees thinned, ape populations declined or retreated with the shrinking forests. Most ape lineages went extinct or became geographically restricted. Gorillas and chimpanzees persisted in the remaining Central African forests. Orangutans survived in Southeast Asian rainforests. But one ape lineage adapted to the changing environment instead of retreating. Between 7 and 6 million years ago, in the fragmenting forests of East Africa, the human lineage split from chimpanzees. Our last common ancestor, never found but inferred from genetic and fossil evidence, was likely a forest ape similar to modern chimpanzees. As forests gave way to woodland savanna, this ape population faced a choice: follow the retreating forest or adapt to a more open environment. Some adapted, and the adaptation that defined them was walking upright. Bipedalism, walking on two legs, is humanity's signature adaptation. It defines our lineage more than big brains, language, or tool use, all of which came later. Why did our ancestors stand up? Bipedalism is inefficient compared to quadrupedalism, walking, at least initially. It's slower. It's unstable, balancing on 2 points instead of 4. It exposes vulnerable organs. It requires significant anatomical reorganization. But in a savanna environment with scattered trees, bipedalism offered crucial advantages. It freed the hands to carry food, tools, and infants while moving between trees. In fragmented forest, the ability to transport resources became essential. It raised the head higher above tall grass, improving visibility to spot predators and prey. On the savanna, seeing over vegetation meant survival. It may have been energetically efficient for long-distance travel, though this advantage emerged only after significant anatomical refinement. The earliest potential bipeds appear around 7 million years ago. Sahelanthropus chidensis, found in Chad, had a skull showing features suggesting upright posture, forward-positioned foramen magnum, where the spine enters the skull, a hallmark of bipedalism. Ororin tubaensis, from Kenya at 6 million years ago, had femur bones showing adaptations for bipedal walking. Thick cortical bone on the femur's neck, indicating it bore weight from upright walking. By 4.4 million years ago, Ardipithecus ramidus was clearly bipedal, though it retained tree climbing ability. Its pelvis shows bipedal adaptations, while hand and foot bones indicate it still spent significant time in trees. These early hominins, the term for species in the human lineage after splitting from chimpanzees, were transitional forms, not fully arboreal, not fully terrestrial, but navigating both worlds. Then, around 4 million years ago, a new type of hominin appeared that was committed to life on the ground. In 1974, paleoanthropologist Donald Johanson was excavating in Ethiopia's Afar region when his team discovered a partial skeleton, 40% complete, an extraordinary find for early hominins. They nicknamed her Lucy, like the Beatles song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds playing in camp that night. Lucy belonged to Australopithecus afarensis and lived 3.2 million years ago. She was small, about 1.1 meters tall, weighing perhaps 30 kilograms. Her brain was roughly 400 cubic centimeters, about the size of a chimpanzee's brain. But her pelvis, femur, knee joint, and foot bones proved she walked upright habitually. Her foot had an arch, absent in apes, but essential for efficient bipedal walking. Her big toe aligned with other toes instead of being opposable like an ape's, indicating she no longer grasped branches with her feet. Lucy still climbed trees. Her fingers curved more than modern humans, suggesting grasping adaptation, but she spent most of her time on the ground, walking across the African savanna. Australopithecines weren't a single species. Between 4 and 2 million years ago, multiple species coexisted across Africa, each with slightly different adaptations. Australopithecus africanus from South Africa was gracile, lightly built, with a slightly larger brain than Australopithecus afarensis. Paranthropus robustus was massively built, with massive jaws and grinding molars adapted for chewing tough plant materials. Its skull featured a sagittal crest, a bony ridge where powerful jaw muscles attached. Australopithecus sediba, discovered in 2008 in South Africa, shows a mosaic of primitive and advanced features, possibly near the transition to the genus Homo. These Australopithecines made simple tools, sharp-edged stones created by striking one rock against another. The Oldowan tool industry, dated to 2.6 million years ago, represents the earliest known stone technology. But Australopithecines remained small-brained and relatively unchanged for 2 million years. They were successful in their ecological niche, bipedal omnivores feeding on fruits, tubers, seeds, and occasional meat. Then around 2.8 million years ago, something shifted. Climate became more variable, environments became more unpredictable, and in response, a new type of hominin evolved. One with a larger brain. One that would eventually become us. The earliest members of our genus, Homo, appeared in East Africa around 2.8 million years ago, distinguished from Australopithecines by larger brains, smaller teeth, more gracile faces, and sophisticated tool use. Homo habilis, handyman, had a brain of about 600 cubic centimeters, 50% larger than Australopithecines. They crafted Oldowan tools deliberately, creating sharp flakes for cutting meat and processing plant materials. But the real transformation came with Homo erectus around 1.9 million years ago. Erectus was revolutionary. They stood 1.8 meters tall, with modern body proportions, long legs adapted for efficient long-distance walking and running. Their brain averaged 900 cubic centimeters, 60% of modern human brain size, and they controlled fire. Evidence from Swartkrantz Cave in South Africa and Wonderwork Cave suggest fire use by 1.5 million years ago. By 400,000 years ago, hearths showed deliberate controlled fires used for cooking, warmth, and protection. Fire changed everything. It provided warmth, allowing expansion into colder climates. It provided light, extending productive hours beyond daylight. It provided protection from predators. No large carnivore willingly approaches fire. Most crucially, it enabled cooking. Cooked food is easier to chew and digest, releasing more calories and nutrients. The energy saved on digestion could be invested in larger, more energy-hungry brains. Homo erectus became the first hominin to leave Africa, migrating into Asia by 1.8 million years ago. Fossils from Java and China show they reached Southeast Asia and adapted to diverse environments from tropical forests to temperate woodlands. They persisted for over 1.5 million years, the longest-lived human species, eventually going extinct around 110,000 years ago. Other Homo species evolved in parallel. Homo heidelbergensis, living 700,000 to 200,000 years ago in Africa, Europe, and Asia, had brains approaching modern size and likely gave rise to both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Homo neanderthalensis, Neanderthals, evolved in Europe and Western Asia around 400,000 years ago. They had brains as large as or larger than modern humans, 1400 to 1600 CC, made sophisticated tools, controlled fire, built structures, buried their dead with ceremony, created art, and likely possessed language. They survived Ice Age Europe for 200,000 years, adapting to brutal climatic conditions. Denisovans, known primarily from DNA rather than complete fossils, lived in Asia and interbred with both Neanderthals and modern humans. Homo floresiensis, the hobbits, evolved in isolation on Indonesian islands, dwarfing to about 1 meter in height, persisting perhaps until 50,000 years ago. By 30,000 years ago, multiple human species inhabited the Old World. Some were stocky and cold-adapted, others were tall and gracile. Some lived in caves, others built shelters from mammoth bones. But only one species survived to the present day: us. In Morocco, at Jebel Irhoud, archaeologists discovered skulls dated to approximately 300,000 years ago. The faces are recognizably modern. The brain cases, while slightly elongated, fall within modern human variation. These individuals are us, Homo sapiens. We evolved in Africa, probably from Homo heidelbergensis populations, likely across the entire continent rather than at a single location. Multiple regions contributed genetic variation, creating a pan-African population connected by migration and interbreeding. For 200,000 years, we remained in Africa. We made stone tools similar to those of other Homo species. We hunted and gathered. We lived in small nomadic bands. We were unremarkable. Then, around 100,000 years ago, something changed. The archaeological record shows explosions of innovation, sophisticated stone blades requiring complex multi-step manufacturing, bone tools shaped into needles for sewing clothing, harpoons for fishing, awls for working leather, shell beads used as ornaments, indicating symbolic thought, ochre pigments suggesting art, decoration, or ritual use. Long-distance trade networks appear, materials transported hundreds of kilometers from their source, indicating exchange relationships between groups. Cave paintings in Africa, Europe, and Asia show sophisticated artistic ability. Animals rendered with perspective and movement, hand stencils, abstract symbols that may represent proto-writing. By 70,000 years ago, humans possessed language, not simple communication, but recursive language, capable of expressing abstract concepts, hypothetical scenarios, past events, future plans, and ideas about things that don't exist. Language allowed cumulative culture. Knowledge could be transmitted precisely across generations. Innovations could spread through populations. Stories could encode survival information, social norms, cosmological beliefs. This cognitive revolution coincided with migration out of Africa. Small groups crossed into the Middle East around 70,000 to 60,000 years ago. From there, they spread across Eurasia, reaching India by 60,000 years ago, Southeast Asia by 50,000 years ago, and Australia by 50,000 years ago, requiring sophisticated boats and navigation to cross open ocean. By 45,000 years ago, humans had entered Europe, encountering Neanderthals. By 15,000 years ago, humans crossed from Siberia into Alaska via the Bering Land Bridge, entering the Americas. Wherever we went, we encountered other human species. In Europe, we met Neanderthals. In Asia, Denisovans. Genetic evidence shows we didn't just coexist, we interbred. Modern non-African humans carry 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. Some Asian and oceanic populations carry Denisovan DNA. But within tens of thousands of years of modern humans arriving in a region, other human species disappeared. Neanderthals went extinct around 40,000 years ago. Denisovans vanished around the same time. Homo floresiensis disappeared by 50,000 years ago. Whether we outcompeted them, absorbed them through interbreeding, or actively exterminated them remains debated. Likely, all three occurred in different regions, but the result was the same. By 30,000 years ago, Homo sapiens was the last human species on Earth. For most of modern human existence, Earth was colder than today. The Pleistocene Ice Age locked vast amounts of water in ice sheets kilometers thick, covering Canada, Scandinavia, and Siberia. Sea levels dropped 120 meters, exposing land bridges. Britain connected to Europe. Indonesia became part of mainland Asia. A continuous landmass called Beringia linked Siberia to Alaska. Glaciers scoured landscapes, creating the Great Lakes, fjords, and U-shaped valleys. Vast tundra and grasslands, mammoth steppe, stretched across the northern hemisphere, supporting megafauna, woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceros, cave bears, cave lions, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats. Humans adapted with remarkable ingenuity. We developed tailored clothing from animal skins, sewn with bone needles using sinew thread, providing insulation against temperatures that dropped to -40 degrees Celsius. We built structured shelters from mammoth bones and hides, creating insulated dwellings capable of retaining heat from small fires. We created sophisticated hunting technologies, atlatls, spear throwers, extending throwing range, traps and snares, coordinated group hunting strategies to bring down mammoths and bison. We made art of breathtaking sophistication. In caves at Lascaux, Chauvet, and Altamira, humans painted animals with perspective, shading, and movement. Some images were placed in deep cave chambers, requiring navigation through complete darkness, suggesting ritual significance. In Australia, Aboriginal peoples developed Dreamtime stories, complex narratives encoding astronomical knowledge, navigation information, environmental understanding, and cultural history, maintained orally with extraordinary fidelity for tens of thousands of years. Then, around 11,700 years ago, the ice retreated rapidly. Global temperatures rose, forests replaced tundra, grassland spread. The megafauna, mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats went extinct across the Americas and Eurasia within a few thousand years, victims of climate change and human hunting pressure. Humans faced new challenges in a transformed world. Around 12,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, a region spanning modern Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, humans began deliberately cultivating plants. It wasn't a sudden invention, but a gradual process. People had gathered wild grains for millennia, but now they selected seeds from the most productive plants and planted them intentionally. Over generations, artificial selection transformed wild grasses into wheat and barley, wild legumes into lentils and peas. Seed size increased. Plants evolved to retain seeds instead of dispersing them. Genetic changes made domesticated crops dependent on human cultivation. Simultaneously, humans domesticated animals. Wolves became dogs around 15,000 years ago, providing hunting assistance, protection, and companionship. Sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs were selectively bred from wild ancestors, becoming sources of meat, milk, leather, and labor. Agriculture allowed permanent settlements. Villages formed, then towns. Populations grew as reliable food supplies supported more people. Social complexity increased. Not everyone needed to produce food, enabling specialization. Some became craftspeople, creating pottery, textiles, and metal tools. Others became religious specialists, merchants, administrators, warriors. Hierarchies emerged. Chiefs became kings. Egalitarian bands transformed into stratified societies with rulers, nobles, commoners, and slaves. Property concepts developed: land ownership, inheritance, wealth accumulation, unknown in hunter-gatherer societies, became foundational to agricultural civilizations. Writing developed independently in multiple regions to track agricultural surpluses, land ownership, and trade. Cuneiform in Mesopotamia around 3400 BCE. Hieroglyphs in Egypt around 3200 BCE. Chinese characters around 1200 BCE. Mayan glyphs around 300 BCE. By 5,000 years ago, civilizations had emerged in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, and Mesoamerica. Cities housed tens of thousands of inhabitants. Monumental architecture, ziggurats, pyramids, temples demonstrated organizational capacity and surplus resources. Legal codes codified social norms. Standing armies protected territories. Art, music, literature, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, the foundations of human culture as we know it, flourished. In 10,000 years, humanity transformed from scattered hunter-gatherer bands into urban civilizations capable of reshaping entire landscapes. It's late now. The sun has set, or is setting, wherever you are in the world. The Earth continues its rotation, the same rotation that began 4.45 billion years ago when gravity collapsed a cloud of stellar debris into our planet. Look at your hand again. Those atoms were forged in dying stars. The calcium in your bones was created in supernova explosions. The oxygen you breathe was produced by cyanobacteria poisoning an ancient atmosphere. The neurons firing in your brain use structures that first appeared in prokaryotic cells 2 billion years ago. You are quite literally the universe experiencing itself. Every atom in your body has a history longer than Earth's existence. They drifted through space, condensed into planets, cycled through rocks and oceans and organisms for billions of years before becoming you. Your species, Homo sapiens, has existed for 300,000 years. That's 0.0067% of Earth's history. Recorded civilization covers only 5,000 years, 0.00111% of the planet's existence. Everything we call history, cities, empires, philosophy, technology, emerged in the final 0.0003% of Earth's timeline. We are newcomers. We arrived at the end of an almost incomprehensibly long story. But what a story!
From a molten hellscape bombarded by asteroids to a planet teeming with microbial life. From single cells to multicellular organisms. From simple invertebrates to vertebrates with backbones. From fish to amphibians to reptiles to dinosaurs to mammals to primates to us. 4.54 billion years of planetary evolution. 3.8 billion years of biological evolution. 600 million years of animal evolution. 66 million years since the asteroid reset the world. 7 million years since our lineage split from chimpanzees. 300,000 years since anatomically modern humans appeared. And here you are. Your existence required every single link in that chain to hold. If the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs had missed Earth, mammals might never have diversified. If the great oxidation events hadn't occurred, complex life couldn't exist. If the moon hadn't formed to stabilize Earth's tilt, climate swings would prevent civilization. If water hadn't arrived from comets, Earth would be barren. You are the product of the only continuous lineage of life that survived 4.54 billion years of asteroid impacts, volcanic catastrophes, ice ages, mass extinctions, predators, competition, starvation, disease, and random chance. Your existence is the most improbable thing in the universe, and the most inevitable. Because this is what matter does given enough time, energy, and variation.
It organizes, it complexifies, it becomes aware. And it looks up at the stars, those same stars whose explosions created its atoms, and asks, where did I come from? Now you know. You come from stardust and time, from chemistry that became biology, from biology that became complexity, from complexity that became consciousness, from consciousness that could finally comprehend its own origin. The Sumerians pressed clay tablets trying to preserve knowledge from before a great flood. We press keys trying to preserve knowledge for after whatever comes next. We are not separate from nature. We are nature, the universe's way of knowing itself, of preserving memory across the eons, of taking 4.54 billion years of planetary history and transforming it into stories, science, art, and understanding. The desert wind still moves across fossil beds where our ancestors walked. The tides still rise and fall, pulled by a moon born in violence. The stars still burn, forging elements that will seed future planets. And somewhere in the darkness, maybe in a museum archive, maybe in a research laboratory, maybe buried in stone waiting to be discovered, evidence rests. Bones and DNA and isotope ratios, testifying to a journey that happened without audience, without narrator, without witness. Until now. Until you. You are Earth become conscious. You are 4.54 billion years of evolution looking at itself in the mirror and recognizing what it sees. The atoms in your body will outlast you. They'll cycle through soil and water and other organisms. They'll exist for billions more years, perhaps until the sun expands and engulfs Earth, returning those atoms to space where they began. But right now, in this moment, those atoms are arranged in a pattern called you. A pattern capable of reading these words, a pattern that can comprehend deep time, a pattern that can feel awe at its own existence. And that pattern, you, is the temporary but magnificent answer to 4.54 billion years of cosmic and planetary evolution, asking a single question: what can matter become? The answer is you. Welcome home. You're 4.54 billion years in the making, and every second of that journey matters because it led here to this moment where the universe finally understands where it came from. And that understanding, that's what makes us human.